back to back. Which one will win? This battle decided today at Telonics in Laguna Beach. Howdy mountain bikers, this is Charlie Sponsel from Vital, aka the artist known as Team Robot. Here to talk about the Push 9.1. I just finished a great back-to-back shuttle test day using the 9.1 and the Fox Podium. That was really eye-opening. I learned a bunch, but I'll tell you what, I learned a lot more after that test when I talked with Darren Murphy over, unfortunately, it was Microsoft Teams, so that's gonna be a point against Darren at Push because I'm really more of a Zoom guy. I hate Teams. Anyway, had a great conversation with Darren, learned a lot after the test, and I'll go into those details later in the video. But for the time being, strap in and watch me hit a bunch of rocks on these two wonderful forks out at Laguna. Asa just got done just blowing up this spot on that helmet cam, so I'm gonna look like a mid-pack sport racer by comparison. What would you call that color? Is that bronze? Or is that like gunmetal? This is the most boring explanation ever. There's a lot to talk about with the 9.1, so you can use the video chapters below to navigate to whatever topics interest you. It's a coil fork, which this is my first significant amount of time back on a coil fork since like, I don't know, I was like 19 or something. But the worst part about a coil fork is that it's really, really linear. So it feels great for the first 2/3, but then it's gonna have a lot more dive on really harsh impacts compared to an air fork, because air forks ramp up and you can adjust the ramp. But there's two really cool features that Push put in here. So the first one is at the top of the fork leg right here, which is called the sub chamber. And basically this little knob opens up a second chamber in the fork leg that works exactly the same as the lower leg volume in an air fork. So at the bottom of your air spring on any air fork, there's just trapped air in the bottom of that magnesium lower. And when your fork bottoms out, the bottom of your air spring on the stanchion just closes that space, and that creates a lot of ramp. And that's actually a problem with a lot of air forks, is that there's kind of no way to get rid of that. So a lot of solutions have come up. RockShox has that crazy bump on the new Zab that we don't know what it is. It's probably mitigating that lower leg ramp. But what's cool is Push allows you to add or remove that feature. So you can add progression via a ramp chamber, or if you want it to be more linear, you can open it up and then it kind of behaves like a normal coil fork. But there's actually two, so the second one is at the bottom of the fork leg, voila, which is the hydraulic bottom mount. Anyway, it's adjustable between 20 and 40 PSI. What that does is it adjusts the damping rate of an internal floating piston in there. So there's a damper circuit down there, and instead of having an expanding bladder, it has an IFP like a lot of shocks and forks. But what's cool is you can change the back pressure on that IFP, so that air chamber, if you go from 20 to 40 PSI, it makes a really noticeable difference in the amount of ramp up at the bottom. So it's kind of confusing, and I had to talk to Darren about it because those seem redundant, that you have an air ramp chamber here and that you have what seems like an air ramp chamber on the bottom, but they function in really different ways. Because this is air exclusively, as you go further into the travel, it ramps up in resistance force like an air spring. So what that means is it's position sensitive. So the sub chamber is position sensitive because it works just like an air spring. But the hydraulic bottom mount on the bottom of the fork is speed sensitive. So what that means is if you're just barely hitting the bottom of your travel, the hydraulic bottom mount, that shaft isn't moving fast enough to engage, so it's not really going to make much of a difference in how your fork feels as you're just easing into it. But like, for instance, if you were to just super overshoot something and smash your fork down, it's going to be blasting, the shaft of that fork is going to be blasting into the bottom of the travel so fast, the hydraulic bottom mount's going to engage immediately on that. So the hydraulic bottom mount will behave differently in different circumstances, which is actually really handy. And the sub chamber basically acts the same in the same position of travel no matter what the circumstance is. So they do different things.
All right, good.
Yeah, all I have to do is just pop that little guide off, voila, and now we're free. Way easier. Yeah, Fox uses that like tiny, I think it's a 2.5 mil or something, and you have to completely remove the entire hose guide, clip it off, and then save the tiny little parts somewhere so you don't lose them. You know when the bars are just moving too fast, like the frequency's too fast, and you're like, oh, that was sped up for sure. That'll be me for all the riding clips.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.
I am particularly in love with that hydraulic bottom mount feature, and I think probably the subchamber air ramp is helping there too. But whatever it is, it's super confidence inspiring in big violent compressions. Yeah, I mean, it's just worlds better than the last coil fork I rode because it has those two features that I think mitigate the downsides of a coil fork. I mean, obviously it's heavier and that's a downside, but it just is what it is. And I'll tell you what, the weight didn't particularly bother me today. Subchamber on, hydraulic bottom out, max PSI, and it was awesome. I'm running the stiffer of the two springs that Darren sent. So it's a 55-pound spring. I'm 190, but I ride the same settings that most charts say for a 210-pound person. That's right where that 55-pound spring is. It starts at 210 and goes up, and it feels great. Yeah, I'm just really impressed with this fork, and I'll be honest, I underestimated it a lot because it comes in travel increments down to 140, and I kind of thought it was marketed as more of a trail fork, and so I didn't really think of it as a put it on your biggest bike, go smash laps at Telonics fork, but it was great. It's a lot more confidence inspiring than the last time I was up here on a Zeb. So the looks are going to be love it or hate it. Like the fork kind of looks like a tactical home security fork, you know, like you would be kicking indoors at a shooting range with this fork. I think some people are going to love that, and some people, like I have a friend who is a designer and he thinks it's a bit much, but it looks really machined and made in America, so that's pretty cool too. So there you go. It's a very, very damped feeling fork. So I was talking with Darren about the damping profile, and he said that a standard 36 Grip X2 damper produces a peak amount of, I want to say 60 pounds of damping force, and then Podium Grip X2 damper was around 80 or 85 pounds, and then this damper produces up to 300 pounds of damping force, and it feels amazing. I think it needs to generate more damping force, in part because there's not very much friction from the chassis because of the inverted design, and then also additionally because of the coil fork. The coil is just going to move a lot more loosely. That's why people love coil forks, is they're more active, so damping helps control a little bit of that just flutter movement. It reminds me a lot of the time I've spent on Olin suspension, how it just feels more damped. It's not as active, especially on rough stuff where it's violent and I'm expecting more suspension action. It stands up pretty proud, and it just smooths things out a lot. So I was really excited. I'm also running it. It's interesting because the Podium, I've been running a lot faster, and I opened up high speed and low speed, and that really felt great on the Podium. And normally I'm a very fast rebound guy, but Darren really recommended trying slower rebound speeds on this fork. He said that's what the internal rebound shim tune is, and that running the external rebound similar will produce a better result. And so I slowed down rebound for today, and that actually felt great. Normally that feels terrible and packs up for me, and there really wasn't any packing that I was feeling. So those are my Telonics impressions, and it feels really good on the front of a long travel bike. So that was a pleasant surprise.
Inverted fork wars.
Back to back! Which one will win? get ready to ascend the podium. Yeah, descending trails, but then ascending podiums. I was really a huge doubter in inverted forks in general, so it's kind of funny that I'm just a huge fanboy now. Because, yeah, flex from a fork sounded like the worst thing ever. And everything I'd ever heard is that, oh yeah, they just have a ton of torsional flex and they're unrideable. That has not been my experience.
Why'd you have to bring 2 front wheels?
Yeah, because they're different axles. It was just super annoying. It's annoying that this one uses a 20 instead of a 15, but then because I have it first, now I'm annoyed that the push takes a 15 instead of a 20. So, just like, guys, get it together. Haven't ridden this thing in about 5 months, this Podium, but I was absolutely obsessed with it when I had it on there. The one thing that I didn't like about the Podium, other than the fact that, yeah, you need a different front wheel or different end caps, and the fact that it retails for like $1 million. Other than those things, what I didn't like about it was that the bottom out wasn't great. It just bottoms out on metal, so you really have to get the right number of volume reducers in there to prevent it from having a harsh bottom out experience. And that's what I think the push does maybe best of everything, is that the hydraulic bottom out is phenomenal. So it'll be interesting to see if we get any bottom outs out here. Yeah, so something that's funny about both of these forks is they're both 170, and I'm running a 180 fork pretty much all the time on this bike otherwise. So I was concerned that I wouldn't like either one of these because of the shorter travel, but honestly, you don't even notice it. They're really
Does the geometry of the bike feel different or off, like the axle to crown quite a bit different?
Which is why I have the spacer in there. So this one's a 5 mil to get it very similar to the size, the axle to crown length of the push, which has a 10 mil spacer on it. So they both have crown race spacers, and so at that amount of crown race spacer, they work out to be 5 millimeters shorter than my 180 Zeb. So it's like pretty close to being apples to apples. I lied, this is actually the worst part of the Podium. Having to change spring pressure right next to the brake rotor is the worst part, because it just spits out a little bit of fork oil every time you take this air pump valve off, and potentially goes directly in your brake pads or rotor. Ain't nobody got time for that.
So this is all air?
Yeah, 100% air. So air positive spring, air negative spring, all air. Yeah, I'm running 104 PSI with 2 tokens in there. And they're the 2, like the Podium has the half-size tokens. Running 2 is sort of like running 1 on a normal fork. I have a very specific feel I'm looking for, where I basically want to feel like I'm pushing against a wall on a fork. I don't want to feel like it's falling underneath me. That's the scariest feeling in the world. Basically, running it as stiff as I possibly can so that it still absorbs bumps. I had this dialed, so I'm just running exactly the same settings I had when I took it off, and then the push was about 4 months to get it, 3 or 4 months to get it set up where it's at right now. I'm running not very much rebound damping on the Podium. I ended up with 6 out of 8 clicks open on high speed rebound, and then 8 clicks open on low speed out of 14. So that's pretty open for how heavy I am and how much spring I'm running. By contrast, the push I'm running a lot slower than I would normally run a fork, but that's what they recommended, and it actually ended up feeling really good. So voila, we're ready to ride. Back to back was really interesting. I think you're all dying to just hear the verdict of like, which one's better? Which one should I get? And I'm not going to tell you that right now. I'm going to tell you some first impressions and comparisons, because actually I really like different things about both forks. So I already mentioned that the hydraulic bottom out and the sub chamber, both of those systems in the push were really, really good at muting violent G outs. And in contrast, I got a really, really loud clank out of the Podium. Like, that's probably my 7th harsh bottom event on this fork. And I've slowly been adding in tokens to try and remove that. But it's still possible to bottom it out really hard, and I don't love that. So I think Push did an incredible job with the 9.1's hydraulic bottom out damper. I never even felt coming near the bottom of the travel. Even with the softer spring in there, it's really impressive. On the other hand, I think the Podium absolutely just felt stiffer on all of the violent turns and in rock sections. I don't know what sort of stiffness that is, right? We have those two camera angles, or rather we have the same camera angle with a GoPro on the down tube of both of those forks. So I'm really curious to see what the front wheel looks like, if we're able to figure that out, if we're able to determine what it is exactly that I'm feeling. But the front end of the Fox just felt more glued in and precise, and I was able to chuck the bike harder, brake later. So that was really confidence inspiring. So I think I like the chassis of the Podium more. And then the spring and damper question is tricky. It's kind of unfair because I have had more time on the Podium on this bike, and I just moved the Push 9.1 onto this bike like on Saturday. So it's Monday. So I've only had, like 10,000 feet of descending on that setup or less, and I've had like tens of thousands of feet of descending on this setup. So I think there's still room to improve the Push in terms of damper and spring setup. I'm curious to try faster rebound. I'm curious to try more compression. I'm curious to maybe try an even stiffer spring and opening up the compression. But I don't know. Okay, so as you saw, I ran both forks through a bunch of rocks really, really hard as fast as I could, and I learned a bunch. And at the end of that test period, at the end of that shuttle day, gun to my head, if I had to pick one, I was leaning towards, I went, yeah, I think I'd go with the Podium. Because it felt stiffer, and there was just a level of support and riding high in the travel that I really covet, especially in scary, steep, rough circumstances. I love feeling like the bars are high. And the Podium was giving me that, and the 9.1 wasn't as much. And it's interesting, the 9.1 felt great. It felt way better than the last fork I'd ridden out there, because I've ridden neither of these forks out of Laguna prior to this test. But when I put the Podium on, it kind of had that magic feel that I remember. And I knew that I didn't want to just hit publish on this, because that actually wasn't the result I was expecting. And I'm not looking to flame products if I don't need to. So I reached out to Darren at Push and let him know, like, hey, yeah, just finished a back-to-back with the Podium, doing laps out at Telonics, and just shot this video. And before we hit publish, I was hoping to connect with you. And he responded immediately. We scheduled a video call the next day. And when I talked to him, he said his eyes kind of popped out of his head when he was reading that I did a back-to-back with a Podium out at Telonics. And I'm going to show my cards here. I look and feel like a little bit of an idiot here, because basically the fork that he sent me was configured for that bike over there, the Transition Sentinel, which is 150 mil travel, more like long travel trail bike. And the fork was configured for rolling up and down trail riding with some amount of rock smashing in the Santa Monica Mountains, like kind of a standard all mountain trail experience with scattered gnarly descents. And we were talking about it, and I said, yeah, actually the 9.1 was phenomenal for that exact configuration. And he's sort of sitting there nodding like, yeah, exactly, that's what we configured it for. And it wasn't until I put it on my Mega Tower, also purple. I'm collecting purple bikes right now for some reason. But it wasn't until I put it on the Mega Tower and took it to Telonics that it started to show weaknesses, especially in a back-to-back comparison with a Podium. And so that kind of got to the core of, Darren, what is this fork? And who is the ideal customer? And that was a really interesting conversation, so I just wanted to share some of those takeaways. First off, the core customer for the 9.1, a lot of companies target their products towards the ultra super elite, like the fastest, gnarliest, and have tons of pro athletes in their marketing materials. But Darren said very clearly, that's just not who our core customer is. We can make forks for people like that. And for instance, he's going to retune the fork for me. So it's already in the mail, headed back to Push. It's getting retuned for that sort of long travel, Charlie trying to smash rocks as hard as he can, doing downhill laps at Telonics sort of tune setup. It's going to be set up for that. He's set up, like Sean Neer, former World Cup athlete, is an enduro athlete, is one of their testers, and he sets up forks for Sean. But their core customer, and who the fork is really designed for, is an enthusiast mountain bike customer riding more mixed terrain. So the fork needs to be stable in gnarly stuff, but they're also going to be riding all sorts of other conditions. And it's kind of designed to be a jack of all trades fork, which is great. That's just detail that I hadn't exactly understood. And Darren admitted, like, yeah, we're trying to figure out exactly our marketing speak as we're trying to approach a wider audience. But their standard customer doesn't know everything about technology and doesn't want to know everything about technology. So typically not your vital nerd forum dweller who's trying to turn every knob and optimize everything. But the Push is really designed to be rider focused, to get them out on the trail with a phenomenal tune specific to their needs, kind of right out of the box. So comfort and control are important, but also being ready to go out of the box. And like I said, as he was describing all this, I said, yeah, actually that's pretty much what it did right out of the box. There were like 2 little adjustments I made. Basically, I just increased hydraulic bottom out on the Sentinel, and then I turned on the subchamber. And after doing those 2 things, the stock setup was great. And I think that just comes down to me being a more aggressive rider, or a pickier rider than average. So the fork did what it was tuned for that bike really well, and those weaknesses started to be apparent when I switched it to a different bike and I switched it to a different application. So it's being tuned for that application right now. This test is going to be ongoing, but it did highlight, I think, the biggest sales pitch of Push, which is customer support. I have it right here in all caps because I was asking Darren, the conversation that we're having on a video call right now, how different is this? Like, okay, I had it tuned for this setup and then I moved it to that setup and it's really not doing it for me. How can we change it? And he said, no, Charlie, this is our whole sales pitch at Push, is we offer this level of customer service to all of our customers. Modularity and tuning and custom configuration and being able to talk directly with the people who design and build your fork, that is our sales pitch. That's part of the reason why you're spending so much money on this thing, is because you're able to talk directly with the people who make the decisions. And so you're in the best position to get this fork super tuned for you. And he cited one customer who sent the fork back 3 times and had never been able to find exactly a fork that met their needs, and they ended up going 3 spring rates lower than normal and running a really interesting compression tune, which is really out of the box for what Push would normally want the fork to feel like. But this customer, who had never been satisfied after trying a million other suspension tuning products and different forks, was really excited and impressed. And that's sort of the sales pitch from Push. So I'm excited to give that the full test and basically test the 9.1 configured for rolling rough trail and sort of enduro riding on the Sentinel, and to be able to test it on the Mega Tower. And yeah, it's a 1 to 5 day turnaround. So that fork should actually be coming back to me pretty soon, and we'll be able to get it out on some rough laps pretty soon. You know, other strengths that I talked about, the hydraulic bottom out's phenomenal. It's super low service. Everything nice that you could ever say about a coil fork applies here. And I just think Push has done a great job of mitigating the downsides of a coil fork. Obviously it's heavy, so there's nothing really to be done about that. either you care about that weight number or you don't. I don't particularly. And 60% of push customers, Darren said, are on e-bikes. So weight isn't like a super ultra concern for them as well. You'll have to decide for yourself, but it's ultra low maintenance. So for the customer who's getting this, it's tuned for their application, it's ultra low maintenance, and when you do have to do maintenance, it's really easy with the syringe and bleed valve. So I think it's actually a really compelling fork. It's just different than what I expected. I viewed it as more of a direct competitor to the Podium, and I think the Podium is targeted more specifically at the super ultra gravity market and requires a lot more tuning on the part of the rider, because like a typical Fox tuning chart literally just has all the knobs in the middle of the range. It's like 11, 11, 11, 11. So you have a lot more work to do as the rider to configure it. And to be sure, I did a lot of knob tuning on the Podium. So if that sounds like you, or rather if a more hands-off, out of the box, ready to rip fork sounds like you, and you're not super concerned about weight, and you've got another, $2,200 burning a hole in your wallet, you might want to check out the Push. So I'll get back to you with more info after testing the new configuration when it gets here. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and maybe whatever the like, hit subscribe and like stuff too. Thanks for coming. Bye. It's made in the USA, which is just really cool. That's really hard to do. It's more expensive to manufacture here, and you have to do things differently than when you have all of Taiwan building a fork for you. So it's pretty cool to see Darren and the team at Push getting it done in the United States. One negative to be aware of is that the fork is really sensitive to front wheels, and specifically hubs. Darren Murphy is the head of Push Industries, and yeah, in discussions with him, I was asking about torsional flex and what's his logic, because I've heard him say over and over again that torsional flex is just not a problem. The parking lot test twisting the handlebars is really not a realistic depiction of the forces that a suspension fork is feeling on the trail. And so I said, Darren, tell me more. And he said, if you think about it, when you have torsional flex in the fork, the tire contact patch is twisting in place. And that can be sketchy in certain instances, like especially up here, if you were to jam a front tire into weird cross ruts and things and you had twisting, that could feel really sketchy. But for the most part, like my tires drifted a million times today under braking, in turns. So my contact patch is doing all sorts of things, and that's not going to be super noticeable, according to Darren. What he said is extremely noticeable is if you have two loose end caps that are floating on the ends of a hub axle, that when the fork compresses, because you have a spring on one side and a damper on the other, they can compress unevenly. So one leg, because the bottom of an inverted fork has separate legs, it's going to be easier to compress the damper side and harder to compress the spring side, because the spring is really holding up your weight. So if your hub is flexing, as this is happening, your front wheel is actually going to be going like side to side, and your contact patch is going to be going side to side, and that's going to be really noticeable and sketchy. So I haven't had the chance yet to mess around with a bad front hub design, but I've been running the XTR front hub. Chris King hubs are really good. Darren has a list, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but we'll include it in the article of hubs that are good and hubs that are going to be bad with this that they don't recommend. But you can see the axle is just super wide and clamped in there to death, just to prevent having any sort of that side to side flex. So that has benefits for torsional stiffness, but yeah, apparently the biggest one is just not having the legs move independently up and down. So there you go. You can see the front brake mount. It's got this wild two position thing going on here, where if you want to bolt a 180 brake, you go there. And if you want to bolt a 200, you go there. And they've got these different spacers. So this is the plus 20 spacer that you would run with like a typical SRAM 180 or 200 mil rotor. And then it's got a plus 23 spacer that you would run with a 203 rotor, or like if you were running a 223. Now I'm running a 220 rotor. So I've got the plus 20 and then a Maven plus 20. Now, if I wasn't running a Maven, I could run a standard Shimano plus 40, but the Maven has these crazy huge brake pads and it doesn't play nice with a Shimano adapter, so that's what it is. Anyway, it looks kind of kooky. It's like, kind of looks like an erector set down there, but it works.